had ordered was getting underway. And so they immediately had an opportunity to join the counterattack. Now, again, the first regiment to arrive was Colonel Hicks with the 40th Illinois. And again, they were moving fast and with a good deal of certainty because a member of General Sherman's staff was guiding them. So they had somebody that had the general's ear that knew where they were supposed to be and how they were supposed to get there. The other two regiments were kind of, pardon me, just kind of following along and guessing where they were supposed to go and what they were supposed to do. Colonel McDowell doing the best to lead those two regiments. So the first of the three regiments to arrive in Jones Field was the 40th Illinois. And immediately when they got there, the orders were deploy in line of battle, face north, and go. Go, 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 go. Join the counterattack, get up there, and fight. And so first, the 40th Illinois would have marched in line of battle across this landscape, and very soon they would have caught up with the right flank of the counterattack and become the right flank regiment of the counterattack. And they continued to face south as they attacked, and driving Confederates as they did so. Just a moment to clarify the area we're standing in right now, as right now you can see it's woods right now. At the time of the battle, the camp of General McClernand's 2nd Brigade was at the top of this ridge. And during the week or so that the McClernand soldiers had been camped here, they had been clearing all of this out. This was their training ground. Now there may still have been large trees, old growth forest standing here, but they had very carefully cleared out all the underbrush. So if you look around right now, you can't see very far, but back then you would be able to see from here right up to the top of the hill. You would have been able to see from here right up to the other side of the ravine. So the counterattack is moving to the south, and the 40th Illinois is on the right flank of the counterattack. And as they're moving south, the Confederates in Crescent Field, Colonel Trabue and the other Confederates in Crescent Field realize that a counterattack is happening to their right. Now they're stuck behind the lines as the Yankees move to the south, and they begin to do what? They begin to reorient, just like we explored when we visited their tablets. They know, so it's the counterattack that's happening in front of them is the 40th Illinois and the rest of Sherman and McClernand's counterattack. They begin to redeploy to take that counterattack in the flank in order to drive it back. But following the 40th Illinois, the rest of McDowell's brigade moves across into Jones Field. They match up with a regiment called the 13th Missouri that was sent from a different division as a reinforcement to General Sherman. General Sherman sent, I need reinforcements, send me some help, and the 13th Missouri was detached from the 2nd Division and sent out here. The 13th Missouri arrived at the same time that the 6th Iowa arrived, and at the same time that the 46th Ohio arrived. And so those three regiments started moving up to the rear of the Union counterattack. Which brings us to a moment of crisis. The 46th Ohio, Colonel Worthington, is on the right. Next is the 6th Iowa, Colonel McDowell, or one of his captains commanding it. And to the left of that, the 13th Missouri Regiment. Right when they reach this position, the 46th Ohio would have been facing south at that time. About half the regiment up there, and then the other half, the right wing of the regiment, extending down into the ravine. They had 700 men in line of battle. So that's a good 200-yard front. So they take up a lot of space. As they get to this point, Captain Heath of Company A, 46th Ohio, recognizes the Confederates are on the right in that hill, in that field on that hill, and that they're redeploying to take the regiment in flank. Immediately, Captain Heath makes the decision to redeploy Company A. He says, Company A, wheel to the right. And actually his Captain Heath's post of duty is on the right of Company A. Company A's post of duty is on the right of the 46th Ohio. That means Captain Heath is the individual, the one man standing closest to the Confederates that are deploying along the top of that hill. And so he sees them. He orders Company A to redeploy. Colonel Worthington noticed this was happening. He saw it was the right decision, and Colonel Worthington ordered the entire 46th Ohio to halt and redeploy to face that way. We're now having a race. There is a race between two lines of battle that have been end to end. And now they are both redeploying to face each other. The regiment, the force that gets the first fire will win. And so the 46th redeploys initially because of the nature of the deployment, a little further down into the ravine, a little further down. They redeploy quickly, they move faster than the Kentucky Brigade, and Worthington's regiment gets the first fire. And the very first fire, this is in the writings of the Kentucky Brigade, the very first fire from the 46th Ohio just sized through that brigade, just cut those guys down. They suffered very heavy casualties just in that moment. The very first volley from the 46th Ohio. As the Confederates started to return fire, eventually they slowly moved back to this position. The 46th moved back to this position, a much better position, higher ground, more commanding, and eye to eye with the Confederates on the other side of the ravine. This starts a chain of events. Once the 46th redeploys, the 6th Iowa continues to the front. Once they realize that their flank is uncovered, because they move beyond the flank of the 46th Ohio, they redeploy from south to west. Once they've done that, the 13th Missouri, continuing to the south, they move beyond the flank of the left flank of the 6th Iowa, whereupon their colonel, Kraft's right, orders them to redeploy and face to the west. Ending up finally with an L-shaped line of battle. It is the 13th Missouri that's finally able to connect with the 40th Illinois. That is all the way at the furthest point of the counterattack and facing south. And the Confederates have come around onto the flank of the 40th Illinois, but it's worked out that these three regiments, 46th Ohio, 6th Iowa, and 13th Missouri, have deployed to protect the flank of the 40th Illinois. And then finally, the 70th Ohio from General Sherman's division ties into the right of the 46th Ohio. Until finally by noon, that first fire is about noon. Within a few minutes after noon, Sherman has a very strong protective line of battle protecting his right flank as the counterattack moves to the south. Now, unfortunately, the counterattack spends its momentum. The Confederates reorganize and they rally themselves. And then the Confederates have a far greater manpower advantage on this point of the field, and the Confederates start pushing the counterattacks back. But once they form this L-shaped defensive perimeter, it's very strong and it holds for a long time. And that brings us to the most significant combat action of the 46th Ohio, Tom Worthington and the 46th Ohio, and the rest of the 1st Brigade at the Battle of Shiloh. It's right here along this ridgeline, facing to the west, as the Kentucky Brigade and elements of Russell's Brigade and some of Claiborne's troops come up through the Crescent Field, redeploy to the east, and for 2 hours, we have a very deadly and very bloody stand-up firefight across this ravine. Both sides loading and firing, loading and firing, loading and firing. And then the Union forces have a lot of extra ammunition. General Grant has done a good job of sending ammunition to the front to resupply his men. So even though they only have the 40 shots in their cartridge boxes, 2 hours later, these guys are still loading and firing and loading and firing and loading and firing. As you know, if they load and fire fast, they can fire 3 shots a minute. So those 40 shots go pretty quickly. It's nowhere near 2 hours. You can just stand and fight. That's a very uncommon episode in a Civil War battle. two lines of battle facing each other at moderate range. 2 hours. 2 hours loading and firing, taking casualties to the rear. Line of dead men being organized to the rear of the line of battle. And for those 2 hours, men from the rear constantly bringing ammunition forward, refilling the cartridge boxes, the muskets getting jammed, the muskets getting cleaned, trying to pour water down the muskets. If they run out of water, it was common practice to urinate in the musket. And urine's pretty good at breaking down, it's acidic stuff. It'll break down that gunpowder in there. And so this is a very uncommon battle. 2 hours, these two lines of battle slugging it out face to face. After about 2 hours, two things are happening. One, the Confederates over here have fully reorganized, and by 2 o'clock, the Confederates are outnumbering the counterattacking force of Sherman and McClernand and steadily pressing them back. And now this line of battle is having its left exposed as the troops over here retreat that way while they're fighting this way. And then one by one, those regiments, the 13th Missouri, start to fall back. At that time, Colonel Trabue, the Kentuckian, notices he has a chance to get the upper hand on these guys he's been fighting for 2 hours. He notices disorganization in the Union line over here based on the retreat that's happening behind them. He orders his men to fix bayonets. All those Confederates fix their bayonets. He orders them to give the rebel yell. One of those moments where you heard that rebel yell on the battlefield at Shiloh. He orders them to give the rebel yell, and then he orders them to charge. He sets them loose. The rebel yell winds those Confederate soldiers up to a very high state of tension, high state of morale, and then they come charging straight down into the ravine and straight up this side of the ravine. It happens to happen at a time when the men here are low on ammunition, and so as the bayonet charge comes straight up the ravine, the 6th Iowa and the 46th Ohio collapse and begin retreating to the rear and to the west. The most dangerous moment in a Civil War battle like this, the most dangerous moment in a fight like this, is the time when one of the sides turns and runs. As soon as one side or the other turns and runs, they're not fighting. They're not fighting. They've turned their back. And those Confederates can just take a knee, aim as carefully as they want, and shoot from close range. Shoot those guys in the back. And so it was the few minutes of the retreat, far more than the 2 hours of fighting, the few minutes of that retreat, the first few minutes of that retreat, that both the 6th Iowa and the 46th Ohio were just eviscerated. They were just cut to ribbons by those Kentuckians and Tennesseans attacking right up through this ravine. And you'll see that in the casualty figures. 701 members of the 46th Ohio at the beginning of the battle. And here you can break down the casualties, it's here on the monument, but it adds up to 245 killed, wounded, and missing out of 700. 2 out of 7. A very high casualty rate, a very high rate of kill amongst the casualties. So it was a heroic defense. 2 straight hours of holding the flank of that counterattack. 2 very valuable hours that the Union Army needed in order to make it through this day, survive this day, and prevent themselves from being cut off from the river and driven into the swamps and destroyed. And it was very important and valuable. It need hardly be mentioned that when writing his report on this particular part of the battle, Colonel Worthington made sure to state that it was the 46th Ohio and the 46th Ohio alone that saved the flank and stopped the famous Kentucky Brigade from attacking and destroying the rest of Sherman's division. He need not say anything about his boss, Colonel McDowell, or the 6th Iowa, or the 70th Ohio on the other flank. At this time, Colonel McDowell himself, during the retreat, was thrown from his horse. He was a big guy, a great big guy. He was thrown from his horse, he was badly injured, and that took McDowell out of the battle and out of the command of the brigade. So we're going to follow the retreat of the brigade more east than south, because there's going to be a good road up over here, and then eventually we're going to get to Jonesfield. Yes, Henry?
Okay, you say they resisted for 2 hours, very valuable time. What did Grant or somebody do with the 2 hours?
Well, by 2 o'clock, when this position failed, that's the same time that Colonel Webster is beginning to put together those cannons at Pittsburgh Landing. So every minute counted. But yeah, a specific benefit to this time would be that during those 2 hours, it gave time for Grant to decide that he needed to make his last stand, his final stand at Pittsburgh Landing, and Confederates might have already been there by 2 if these guys hadn't held out.
And at the same time, Prentiss was resisting at the Hornet's Nest.
And at the same time, Prentiss was resisting, Wallace and Prentiss resisting in the Hornet's Nest, and Hurlbut fighting hard on the eastern flank.
And so to the east of us, we have more of Sherman's men that are falling back.
Yes.
Where's Sherman's actual line?
Probably just behind us.
A little behind us.
A little behind us. Sherman's forces are basically on this side of the road that we're about to get to, and McClernand's folks are going to be on the other side of the road. So yeah, we're going to walk about 200 yards or so up through the woods until we get to a paved road, and that's the dividing line between Sherman and McClernand.
You want real quick?
I'd recommend you consult Major Reed.
41,
59, 74, 83.
He already told you his history.
I mean,
History major,
so
that
they add up like how you count people.
Well,
Yeah, exactly.
That's 181 men.
181? Okay, yeah, I can see that.
No, all I know is, at the time of the battle, this was the parade ground. This was the parade ground for General John McClernand's 2nd Brigade under the command of Colonel C. Carroll Marsh. And so on this side of the road would have been the tents of Marsh's 2nd Brigade. This would have been the parade ground, the company, the regimental street. And then, as I said before, they had spent several days prior to the battle clearing all of this area that we just traversed of underbrush so that they could use it for a training ground. And so where we're standing now, at the time, we could look straight out and all the way down to where we just were, probably, to the ravines. The retreat, Colonel Worthington's men, Colonel Worthington, his men, and the rest of the brigade moved to the east, and then as the Confederates were pressing this way too, they of course pressed them to the north. So we're going to continue to Jonesfield here. Iowa infantry formed at this point at 11 o'clock, attacked. It was 11th Iowa was part of the counterattack force, part of General McClernand's part of the counterattacking force. And then, as it says, they fell back to this spot. So the 11th Iowa formed here for the counterattack, attacked straight down that way, and fell back straight back this way. It all made sense because the tents of that camp would have been right about here. And then the open area of the company street would have been between us and Sherman Road. So the 11th Iowa is going straight down the parade ground. That's what they're doing. And that's helpful because Colonel Worthington tells us when he finally was able to catch and rally the survivors of the 46th Ohio, he says that we rallied behind the 11th Iowa. So because we know where the 11th Iowa was, we know that their access was the same, forward and backwards. We know that we've reached now, we're on the spot where the 46th Ohio rallied after being routed from their 2-hour fight at the lip of the ravine to the west and to the south of here. At this point, who was left on duty with the 46th Ohio deployed here and waited for orders. The rest of the force that was falling back were deployed along this edge of the woods. You see where the tablets show you that orientation, and then also bending back to the north and the west. You see the square tablets, the rectangular tablets in the field all point to the west over there. So there's kind of an L-shaped line of battle as the Confederates press to the north from the south, but also other Confederates press to the north and then east to try to outflank this position. And that's the position for the rest of the day. Pardon me. The result is that the 46th Ohio did not get back into the battle again. After being held in reserve for some time, Colonel Worthington took the regiment and he marched them to Pittsburgh Landing. He marched them to Pittsburgh Landing just in anticipation, just a few minutes before General Sherman ordered the entire position, the entire division here, to slowly give up their position and retreat across the Tillman Branch ravine and form another line on the other side of the ravine. And that does mark the end of the participation of the 46th Ohio in the first day's fighting.
And what time is this?
Would have been about, they would have arrived here about 2:30. They might have stayed in this reserve position for as much as 30 minutes before Colonel Worthington marched them off to the landing. Once Colonel Worthington was at the landing, he left his regiment there to rest while he went to find them some ammunition and some food, and he also managed to find General Grant and give him some valuable advice of some sort or other, lost to history at this point. But as you see, even in the heat of battle, he's managing to win friends and influence people on the battlefield. And that does bring us to the end of the story of the 46th Ohio in the battle. Of course, on the second day, the Union Army counterattacked and drove the Confederates from the camps. I have some notes here I wanted to follow. It drove them from the camps, and by the evening of April 7th, the 46th Ohio had returned to their original camps. They'd retraced this ground and returned to their camps.
Did they fight their way to their camps, or did they just?
I do not know for sure. I think that the 46th Ohio was more in reserve on the second day of the battle, but if those men who were with the regiment that did participate would have participated with General Sherman's counterattacking force, and that would have crossed this ground to our north and northwest right now. That's the second day terrain that Sherman traversed in fighting their way back. But what I can say is by the evening of April 7th, they were back in their tents. They were burying their dead. They were collecting their dead and wounded and burying their dead. And they were entrenching their camp. And one of the few places around the Shiloh battlefield we can still, as I understand it, see earthworks are on private property back over there by the camp. If you get permission to go back on that private property, I didn't try to get it. There are evidently traces of earthworks constructed by Worthington and the 46th Ohio after the battle, not from the battle, but constructed after the battle.
Did Grant climb with shovels?
Huh? I don't know whether they got their shovels or whether they finally decided it was okay to dig a hole with their dinner plate. I guess they decided if they wanted earthworks, they were just going to have to make some earthworks, however they got it done. Things went pretty bad for Tom Worthington because of the Battle of Shiloh. Now, he performed very well. He led his regiment very well, and the 46th Ohio fought heroically. But he continued to make enemies for himself, especially when he realized he couldn't get any relief or any attention from General Sherman or from General Grant. He started writing letters to the governor of Ohio. And one thing you see in the weeks following the Battle of Shiloh is an enormous controversy played out in the newspapers between the Lieutenant Governor, Benjamin Stanton, Lieutenant Governor of Ohio, and General Sherman, writing long, nasty letters to each other for publication. So they're side by side on the front page of the newspapers. And these go on through the summer of 1863, Sherman versus Stanton. Neither of them says anything about it after the war. In Sherman's memoirs, he said, after the battle, some pathetic little politician in Ohio tried to make hay out of our experiences of Shiloh, and I wrote an essay that put him in his place. And that's Sherman's memory of it when he writes his memoir. But if you were reading the Ohio newspapers during the summer after the Battle of Shiloh, you would have seen weekly missives from these guys, missiles from these guys. Stanton here, Sherman here. No, you're a liar. No, you're a liar. And a lot of that based on a large social, cultural understanding by the summer of 1862 that called all Ohio troops cowards. There were a number of Ohio regiments that did not fight very well at the Battle of Shiloh. They were green and they ran away at the first fire and so on. But by the time the summer came around, within a few weeks, that morphed into Ohio is the cowardly state. Ohio is the state that's not pulling their load in the fight for the Union. And of course, obviously for the politicians and editors in Ohio, that was bad news. And for the soldiers at the front, they're all writing letters back home saying, what on earth is going on? What are you talking about back there? We're not cowards. We didn't lose the battle. We won the battle. So that's the seed behind that controversy but it also involves Worthington. Worthington thought he found allies in the politicians, the governor of Ohio and Lieutenant Governor Stanton, and he could write them long letters saying what's wrong with Sherman. And information from those letters could appear in the paper a couple of days later. And Sherman can read that a couple of days after that and go, I wonder how this newspaper editor knew that. I wonder how he knew that happened in the battle. Especially to the 46th Ohio. Wow, this guy knows a lot about the 46th Ohio and what they did in the battle. Apparently they saved the whole division, didn't they? Bad news for the 46th Ohio. They fought very well. A lot of them got killed, a lot of them got wounded, and now they're in Dutch with the general because of this chit-chat, this chatter that's going on in the press. Well, Worthington managed to survive this particular tempest, and he led the regiment through the siege of Corinth, what's the campaign of Corinth, what we call the siege of Corinth, and captured Corinth. He managed to continue his leadership of the 46th Ohio without a promotion. He would tell you a well-deserved promotion, overdue promotion to general. He should at least be a brigadier now, if he's not in charge of the entire Union war effort, as he should be. He graduated in 1827, before anybody else that's in the Army. But things got very bad for him in the summer of later in the summer of 1862. The 46th Ohio, along with a lot of Grant's army, was spread out across West Tennessee, protecting the Memphis and Charleston Railroad. So instead of being a large army of maneuver all together and moving over the landscape, they're spread out all over West Tennessee. 46th Ohio is manning an outpost, a fort they've built near LaGrange. Someone else is protecting a fort at Moscow. These are all towns between here and Memphis along the Memphis and Charleston Railroad. And at some point late in the summer, some Confederate raiders, some Confederate cavalry began raiding along and tearing up the railroad and burning the bridges, and it became necessary for Colonel Worthington to evacuate his post and move under orders from his more exposed post to LaGrange, which was the a larger encampment where he'd be safer. He managed to escape in the nick of time and save his entire regiment, marching under orders from higher command from his fort over to LaGrange. Upon arrival at LaGrange, he participated in a bit of a celebration. He never thought much about it, but apparently someone else mentioned it. Apparently someone else saw it. Apparently someone else had been waiting for Tom Worthington to screw up. Because Tom Worthington had made this bed a long time ago. And now it was time for him to sleep in. And very soon after this little tempest in a teapot, after rescuing, as far as he's concerned, his regiment from the dunder-headed commanders who left them out there at that fort, and just tippling just a little bit in celebration, nope, the arrest orders came down, drunk, on duty, with the enemy in our front. That's a court-martial offense. Of course, Tom won't stand for any of that. He demands a court-martial. He demands a court-martial so that he can beat these charges against this poor, innocent man who's really the hero of this whole story, isn't he? The court-martial did not work out the way Tom had hoped. He was convicted, and he was cashiered from the Army. He did not appear in the Union order of battle again. The 46th Ohio Regiment, commanded by the enormously capable, young, and qualified Colonel Charles Walcott, continued to serve in General Sherman's command. Whether Sherman went on to command a corps or an army, the 46th was always part of that command. Clearly Sherman admired something about the regiment, if not the commander. And once Walcott was in charge, the 46th really performed enormously well, and they were a go-to regiment for Sherman anytime he needed it. Like I said, you'll see Charles Walcott's name high up on the order of battle once you get to the Atlanta campaign and once you get to the March to the Sea. The survivors of Shiloh, 46th Ohio survivors of Shiloh, are part of that army that marches from Chattanooga to Atlanta and then from Atlanta to the sea, and they're there at the end of the war. The victors. They left, unfortunately, for reasons that I think we've documented adequately. They left their commander, their original commander, behind. But they owed a lot to Tom Worthington as the man who organized them, recruited them, trained them very well, and led them heroically here in the Battle of Shiloh, including a time when they were trapped behind enemy lines, and he helped lead them out from behind enemy lines. He led them in the 2-hour combat. He rallied them after they were driven from their position, and he marched them to the rear, and he got them more ammunition and more food. He did a good job. But we're talking about here, ultimately the story here is a story of a talented man with an enormous gift for self-sabotage. And indeed, it's a lesson on how not to be a good military officer. You can be smart and talented, but these are not all of the requirements. An officer must be able to follow orders, be part of the plan, do his part of the plan. He needs to report to the person that's placed over him, and he needs to coordinate with other levels of command and other regiments. And Tom Worthington found himself utterly unable to do any of this stuff. Perhaps if, as he'd wished, he was placed in the job that they eventually gave U.S. Grant, maybe then he would have been in his element. But clearly he was never going to rise that far on his own personal ability to win friends and influence people. So thank you very much for coming out on this program. We're going to take questions here in a minute, but I want to let you know it's now 10:54, so we've got 6 more minutes of our scheduled time. But at 11:30, a program about the Union counterattack that we've been talking about already, a program about the Union counterattack called Tactical Surprise, led by a terrific interpreter, Ranger Tom Parson, is going to meet right here at tour stop number 12. So if you want to hang around in Jones Field and join that program, you can certainly do so. This is a convenient time to do that. If after we do our